Some say he's in a rush to take power from his father. Others argue Mohammed bin Salman is on a path to reform Saudi Arabia. But what risks is the Crown Prince running, and can he meet the many challenges he faces both at home and in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. The arrests in Saudi Arabia have spurred days of speculation and analysis. There was the element of surprise. The detentions took place on Saturday night and without warning. The element of power. Most of those arrested are men of influence. And an element of uncertainty. Is this about purging corruption or consolidating power? The man behind it all, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has been a figure of controversy for months now. He's regarded as a progressive leader, touting social and economic reforms. But critics say MBS, as he's known, is also power-hungry. Over the course of 2 years, he went from being third in line to the throne to first. So what are those arrests all about? The detained individuals span a range of sectors in Saudi society. 11 princes and several ministers were taken into custody on Saturday night. The Saudi government says they're all implicated in corruption and their assets have been frozen. Prince Al-Walid bin Talal is perhaps the most well-known name on the list. He's the richest man in the Arab world, with stakes in major companies like Apple, News Corp and Twitter. Adel Fakir was also arrested as the economy minister. He was behind large social reforms to reduce Saudi reliance on oil. And Prince Mohammed bin Abdullah was detained. He was the head of Saudi's National Guard. Mohammed's arrest gives Prince Mohammed more direct control over the country's guards. He already controls the defense and interior ministries. Prince Mohammed has surprised many by pushing back against Saudi Arabia's religious elite. In 2016, he took steps to rein in the country's religious police. They have been back on the streets since June, but are reportedly less vigorous about their chastising. MBS also allowed a gender-mixed celebration of Saudi National Day in September, despite a backlash from religious clerics. And 2 weeks ago, he said Saudi Arabia must return to a, quote, moderate, balanced Islam that is open to the world and to all religions. Let's now bring in our guests. Joining us in Beirut, Joseph Kikuchi, a Middle East analyst and senior fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. In London, Andreas Krieg, assistant professor at the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. And also in Beirut, Nicholas No, editor-in-chief of MideastWire.com. Good to see all three of you. Joseph Kikuchi, and let me start off with you. A staggering couple of days have passed. I'm just wondering what we are in the middle of witnessing. What's happened?
We are witnessing tremendous changes in the system of government of Saudi Arabia. We have a new leadership that has been in place for about 2 years now, but obviously a consolidation of power on the part of the heir apparent, Mohammed bin Salman, who is determined to push forward with his very complicated economic, political, and social agendas. So therefore, what we are seeing, what we are witnessing, is the implementation of the plans that he has presumably thought through for the past several months. I'm not surprised by the changes that have taken place. I've been expecting them. And to be honest with you, I'm expecting a lot more in the next phase.
And a lot more, but not from the Al Salman branch, I suspect.
It's difficult to know exactly how the response to the dramatic changes are going to be, but presumably the disputes that exist within the country have nothing to do with the leadership itself, because the heir apparent is there, and when there is a succession, when the time comes for a succession process, I don't think that there will be much debate or dispute about the fact that Mohammed bin Salman will become the next ruler. The question is, what kind of a ruler he is going to be? Is he going to be a just prince, or is he going to be someone who will push everyone around? I am betting on the fact that he might be a very good just prince, but time will tell.
Andreas Krieg, what do you think we've just witnessed? Is this a case of reform as put forward by the prince, or are we just seeing a consolidation of power?
Big question mark. I mean, most of the analysts are quite, in doubt whether this is one or the other. I mean, it's a bit of both, I think. On the one hand, I think Mohammed bin Salman knows that if he wants to save Saudi Arabia, want to save this failing rentier state of Saudi Arabia, he will have to make drastic changes. And that was clear from the onset when his father took over 2.5 years ago. And in order to achieve this, he has to do this radically. I mean, it's a revolution. It's not just reform. I think we're talking about revolution. And revolutions usually need to have a certain degree of coerciveness in there. There has to be coercion. They can't be always consensual, especially in a system like Saudi Arabia. So it was clear that in order to transform this country and bring this into the 21st century, some people had to be chopped off, and we've seen that already with Mohammed bin Naif over the summer, and more people to follow. Prince Mohammed, for example, was another one that was on the list. What is now a little bit surprising is that we have people like Prince Talal being on the list as well. And a lot of businessmen, people who have control over money in Saudi Arabia.
Do you think that's a message that nobody is exempt here? You either fit in or this is what we do with you?
Yes, I think this is the message, is no one is exempt from it. But then the question is, why is the Salman branch not exempt from it? There is no doubt that Saudi Arabia is, and one of the biggest flaws of Saudi Arabia is that it is one of the most corrupt rentier systems in the Gulf. The rentier state in itself is, by Western standards, a corrupt system. So how can you go around and say, we're going to chop this head, but we're going to leave this one in power? If you spend $100 million on a summer holiday in Morocco, or $600 million on a private yacht, as the king and his crown prince have done over the summer. So, I mean, there is some sort of inconsistency here with the application of the term corruption. And I think it is more about consolidation over political power, economic power, and military power, or the security sector at large, because this is what the arrest of Mohammed was all about. It's about controlling the entire security sector of Saudi Arabia.
Nicholas, no, I mean, really is the stuff of movies, isn't it? I mean, that dramatic helicopters missing people, a swoop of princes, it doesn't matter who you are, jail in the Ritz-Carlton. I mean, how has this been viewed from where you are? How important, I would say step, but actually steps, are you witnessing?
Well, I'm here in Beirut, Lebanon, and I think it's probably best to have Lebanese answer how they're viewing it. I can speak at least on part of American and European officials that I've spoken to here and elsewhere, and back home in the U.S. There is a great degree of concern that the Crown Prince, together with key actors, especially in my own government, in the American government, have unleashed a series of forces that go way beyond what can be kind of planned out like a nice kind of, chess game or something like that. There are a series of contingencies and huge, dangerous forces that are now shaping and reshaping interests and actions that may or may not be taken by different actors. That's the real danger here, in that we have a very complicated security architecture of the Middle East that has been under tremendous strain and threat. Indeed, for many of us, we see it as basically breaking and broken. And the idea of adding yet another layer of incredible new stresses with outcomes that none of us can pretend to really understand and to map out. This is an incredibly dangerous moment, and that's why I would disagree with your first speaker, who perhaps was not surprised by these events. Perhaps he wasn't, but I'd say in this next stage, it's going to be incredibly difficult for any of us to try and guess what is going to happen. We are in a real period of unknown contingent possibilities, and I know at least on the U.S. government side, that is tremendously worrying to folks. But a lot of people are worried, for example, just about the leadership of our president in this matter, who has apparently wholeheartedly supported the Crown Prince's actions and who even deemed the people that have been arrested as being guilty, essentially, of having, quote unquote, milked the cow for too long. So there is concern within the U.S. government, and especially among U.S. and European observers, that we are in an incredibly dangerous period that's even more dangerous than all of the different dangers that have been piling up in the Middle East for the last few years.
Andreas, do you agree?
I completely agree with that. I mean, the Middle East has been on fire, and as we've seen with the Qatar crisis already, that was adding another layer. the Gulf was always a center of stability in recent years, financial stability, some sort of political stability, and they were able to act as a center of gravity as well for all the other conflicts. And now we're creating conflict in the Gulf, and the strongest Arab country still is Saudi Arabia, at least financially. And now we're having instability and uncertainty in Saudi Arabia as well. And that has ripple effects on all the other conflicts in the region. And I think we have to see this within the context of what's going on in the Gulf more widely. I mean, reform has taken place in all of the Gulf countries, and most of the time consensually, as in Qatar, more or less consensually in the UAE, but also quite radically in the UAE, and now absolutely revolutionary in Saudi Arabia. And I think what Mohammed bin Salman is trying to do, he's trying to emulate Mohammed bin Zayed's push for centralized power in the United Arab Emirates that we've seen over the last decade. And he's trying to do this not over a decade, but he's trying to do this within a few months in a system that is a lot more backwards than the United Arab Emirates. So the measures
that could be quite a dangerous duo, couldn't it? And Joseph, so not as positive as you in this shuffle, in this purge, in this outcome, whatever you want to call it.
I do not deny that we are in dangerous times and that serious concerns must be expressed in what's going on. But let's not exaggerate and let's not go on hyperboles left and right. The end of the world has not started. There is not going to be World War III tomorrow. So I think it's important for people to realize that there are dramatic transformations underway. We want to call it consolidation of power. We want to call it fighting corruption. We want to call it revolutionary step. I have no problem with any of those things, but I am not surprised that these things are occurring simply because of what is going on. And I would like to basically say, in a simple way, that even though the Al Salman may be exempted from this particular chain of events that occurred during the past several days, we don't know whether or not this will continue, whether there will be other members of the family who will be involved. We're talking about an absolute monarchy where there is a new leadership in place, and they are determined to go ahead and implement what they perceive to be their vision. This is going to unrattle a lot of people. People are going to be upset with it. There is no question about that. But at the same time, I think that the onus is really on Mohammed bin Salman as the heir apparent to show whether he can go ahead and do all these things, if you want to call it his revolution, whether he can be a revolutionary leader without emulating the revolution that occurred in Iran in 1979.
Okay, let's bring in Nicholas. Nicholas is dying to say something. Nicholas?
This is absolutely absurd that a 32-year-old billionaire has the right to destroy lives in this part of the world, okay? First of all, this is absurd on its face. Second of all, it is absolutely our responsibility right now to sound the alarm, okay? I'm an American citizen here in Lebanon, and my Lebanese friends, who some of them hate Iran and some of them hate Saudi Arabia, they are deathly scared for their children's safety and for their safety. So no, it is absolutely the right time to raise the alarm and say the forces that are being unleashed are tremendous, they are dangerous, and they could lead to further death and destruction in a part of the world that cannot bear it anymore. So no, I think it is absolutely our responsibility right now to raise the alarm. Maybe not World War III, but this looks disastrous for all of us. Sorry.
Okay, Joseph, briefly, if you will.
That is fine. Okay, that is fine. You raised the alarm. So what? So what? Things are going to occur no matter what we decide to do. We are
so what?
I would like.
Okay, gentlemen, let's agree to disagree. Let's agree to disagree on this point. Nicholas brought in Iran. I'd just like to talk about Saudi Arabia and the growing impact of what it's done. It's also been in the news this week, obviously, for its international influence. The Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri abruptly resigned on Saturday afternoon, just hours before the Saudi arrest. He did so in Riyadh, which immediately raised questions about Saudi's involvement. Hariri said he was stepping down partially because of Iran's influence in the region. Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon say Saudi Arabia forced him to cite this reason. If true, that would tie in to Saudi's growing animosity with Iran. Riyadh recently accused Iran of helping Houthis in Yemen fire a rocket towards Saudi Arabia. As part of its anti-Iran agenda, Saudi Arabia has also strengthened ties with Israel in recent days. That, in turn, brings it closer to the West. And in particular, the US President Donald Trump tweeted his support for the Saudi arrest, saying The detained princes had been, his words, milking the country for years. But Andreas, I'd like to go back to Iran. How much of this has got to do with Iran's growing influence? I mean, it's come out pretty well from the wars in Iraq and Syria. And how much of that has niggled what is happening in Saudi Arabia at the moment?
If we take a more of a regional approach to this rather than looking internally in Saudi Arabia, then obviously Saudi Arabia as a kingdom, it wants to assume leadership. Since Salman came into power in 2015, he wanted to reassure the Arab leadership over the Middle East vis-a-vis the Persian leadership of Iran. And I think this is very important. He wants to work, Saudi Arabia wants to be the bulwark against Iranian expansionism. And they see this as a threat. Mohammed bin Salman in particular sees this as a huge threat. He's paranoid about Iran's influence in Iraq. That's why he's reaching out to even the Shias in Iraq who are anti-Iranian. He's trying to consolidate power in Lebanon, thereby working under the table with the Israelis to trigger something against Hezbollah. He's working against the Houthis in Yemen. So this is very much about expansionism, but he wants to strengthen the kingdom, make the kingdom more robust. And I think this is how it all fits in with the US foreign and security policy in the region as well. Donald Trump relies on Saudi Arabia as the most important policeman in the Middle East, and not just in the Arab world, in the Middle East. And the US administration is very much also embracing this kind of, these paranoias, are driven by these paranoias about Iran. And so they want Saudi Arabia to be strong, to make decisive actions, take decisive action, take over responsibility in a way that Saudi hasn't done for the last decade or even longer. And that created the kind of void that the Iranians were able to fill in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon. And but the problem is, now, is this really, for this you need to have a stable leadership. And I'm not sure whether these internal problems within Saudi will create a more stable and more sustainable leadership in the kingdom, or whether this will actually throw the kingdom into more of a state of disarray that will eventually have ripple effects on partners in the region, because Saudi cannot assume that leadership. Because in the past,
let me put this, sorry, let me just put this to
based
Joseph.
on realpolitik.
Joseph, he's thrown the net very wide, hasn't he, both within the country and outside of the country. What is he playing at when it comes to Saad Hariri, what he apparently made him do, his resignation, and how does that play out in trying to take control of Iran, or trying to get the upper hand when it comes to Iran?
We have had turmoil in the Middle East really for a long period of time, and the Saudi reaction to the Iranian hegemonic influence in the region is only natural. This is part of a larger Sunni-Shia confrontation that's been going on for decades, if not longer, and it will unravel over the next several years and decades as well. From the Saudi perspective, as we just heard a moment, and I agree, there is what is really the onus on Saudi Arabia is to assume the burden that, in fact, Iran is not going to have the free-for-all to do whatever it wants in the Arab world. It should not interfere in the internal affairs of the Arab countries, which is really something that's been happening in Lebanon as well. We've seen it with the rise of Hezbollah, and we've seen it with a lot of different other places in the Arab world. However, I keep coming back to the fact that Mohammed bin Salman, as the heir apparent, has a great deal of responsibility, not only to respond and to be determined and to have reforms in the country, but he has to portray the image of being a just prince. If, in fact, he overplays his hand, there is always the danger that he will make tremendous mistakes. Not only his country will pay for it, but everybody else will pay for it. The question is whether he has the wisdom to actually take into account the different points of views within the Saudi society. I think he does. Time will tell whether I am correct or not.
His past foreign policy record is nothing too promising to go by, is it, if you look at what he's done in Yemen and the Gulf blockade? But let me just put this to you, Nicholas. I mean, you were talking about how petrified people are there in Beirut and Lebanon about what's happening at the moment. How do you think this will play out there when it comes to Hariri and his role in what he's just done in stepping down, where this leaves Hezbollah? Will it be drawing in Israel? What is the scenario that's been set up here?
Well, I mean, kind of pulling back from a street-level view of what's happening here in Lebanon, which is perhaps not so much for me to say, at least in the architecture, the immediate architecture around Lebanon, this adds an incredible new layer of destabilization to what has been for several months, if not a year or more, looking like a kind of slide towards confrontation, possibly involving Hezbollah and Israel. That's one of the great fears among analysts, external officials, and also many Lebanese that you talk to as well. This could add another layer that pushes that kind of confrontation. There's a great argument about this right now as to whether or not these actions kind of hurt that march to war, slide to war, or actually stem it. The sad thing and the dangerous thing is that a lot of this is in the hands of hopefully what Joseph hopes is a kind of enlightened prince, which is not only anachronistic, but is also incredibly dangerous, given that the consolidation of so much power and so much ability to disrupt different countries and people's lives is in the hands of one man, and possibly maybe Jared Kushner and Donald Trump. That's inherently dangerous. Not only is it anti-democratic, but I would argue that that's inherently dangerous, especially for this brand of Saudi leadership. So right now, we stand on the edge of really possibly having a whole new series of confrontations. I mean, for God's sakes, Saudi Arabia has more or less declared war on Lebanon and Hezbollah, more or less said that Iran is now kind of has given them a casus belli, for example, by the firing of rockets from Yemen via the Houthis. We're in very complicated and dangerous territories, and I apologize to Joseph for getting upset before, but really, when this resignation happened here in Beirut, it was shocking to people, even people that just absolutely hate Iran. I mean, our friends were going to the grocery store here to buy, food because they thought the war was coming right then and there. That's the degree of concern that's on the street. And
I think it's always important to hear how political moves and gestures affect people on the street, because surely, one would hope that politicians are doing what is best for those who live in the country. Joseph, you want to say something? Quickly, hop in.
No, what I was going to say, I also happen to live most of my time in Lebanon, and you just heard an absurd declaration that somehow it is Saudi Arabia that's declared war on Lebanon, whereas we have now been listening for the past 10 years, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, lambasting Saudi Arabia on an afternoon basis, blaming Saudi Arabia for everything under the sun. And let's remind our viewers that there are 500,000 Lebanese who are working in the Gulf, who are benefiting and repatriating $8 billion per year to this economy that will be destroyed without that kind of assistance.
And Joseph, can I just ask you something very quickly? I know, excuse me jumping in here, but we are running out of time. I know that the Prince has got a lot of support in the country as well for doing what he's doing, particularly amongst the youth. But he's taken quite a gamble, hasn't he? Because it's either he wins or he loses. And if he loses big. And briefly from all three of you, if I may.
This is absolutely right. There is no plan B. Mohammed bin Salman must succeed. His Vision 2030 project is it for saving the kingdom for the future. And I think that he is determined to go ahead and do this. But again, I repeat, the onus is on him to prove that he has the mettle, he has the mantle to actually rule as a just prince and not as a dictator.
Andreas, this really is high risk, isn't it? I mean, it's do or die for him, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, he either becomes the most powerful man in the Middle East, or he will fail and end up in some jail after a coup d'etat. But I do think most of the big power gamble is between two centers. One is the old center of power, the old elites, which are now really looking over their shoulder, being paranoid, and the young generation that feels left out in Saudi Arabia, unemployed, not really being part of this. And they obviously cheer. They say this is a great development. But these young people don't have the kind of monetary or political or security-related power to actually pull the strings. And this is the older generation. So this is a huge risk here. And I think eventually, if he doesn't succeed, he'll be in some jail somewhere. And, Saudi will break apart. So
okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Andreas, Krieg, with those final comments. Thank you as well to Joseph Kikuchi and Nicholas No. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJE Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJE Inside Story. From me, Jane Dutton, the rest of the team. Bye-bye.